So right now we're gonna discuss the electrolytic capacitors. So as you can see here in this slide, we have basically two kind of capacitors. This capacitor, this is basically a THT capacitor or true hole technology device. Here we have terminals, okay, and this is a flat capacitor or SMD capacitor that we find in laptop motherboards and of course desktop motherboard. So this is the symbol for the electrolytic capacitor. So those capacitors are polarized capacitors, okay, because we have here plus and minus. It's not like ceramic capacitors. The electrolytic capacitor or the tantalum capacitors are polarized capacitors. Always pay attention. If you want to install any electrolytic capacitor, you should pay attention to the polarity, okay, to the plus and minus. So basically there is two values that you should pay attention in these capacitors: the voltage, okay, as you can see for this capacitor, for example, we have 35 volts, okay, so this is the working voltage, this is the maximum voltage for these capacitors, and the capacitance. Here we have 330 microfarads, okay, and of course for this capacitor also you'll find the maximum voltage and the capacitance, its capacitance in microfarads, okay. So we use this kind of capacitors in the filtering purposes. The purpose of these capacitors is to filter the signal, okay? To filter the signal. We find basically this kind of capacitors in the switch mode power supplies, okay? Especially after the bridge rectifier. So in order to filter the voltage or the signal and then get a continuous signal or a DC signal. So basically this is a filtering capacitors. So let's pass to the next slide. Here we have ceramic capacitors. So the ceramic capacitors also are filtering capacitors, but for this kind of capacitors are not polarized capacitors, as you can see, okay. You can connect it to the motherboard or install it to the motherboard in both sides, no problem, okay. So basically this is a three-hole capacitor or THT capacitors, and here we have SMD or flat ceramic capacitors. You can find of course this kind of capacitors in the small motherboards like the smartphone board or the laptop boards. So this is the symbol. Basically we don't have here plus and minus, okay. So let's pass to